Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about some of the research I do. I'm part of Fidelity Center for Applied Technology and Fidelity Investments, which is an innovation department, and I'm in the research team. And my role is specifically to look at AI research and see where is it headed over the next few years, and make sure that we're prepared to help our customers as much as possible based on trends that we're seeing. So I've been following, okay, that slide looks funny, but I've been following this space for a while, and I started getting really excited about this technology. Okay, I don't know why this slide's a little bit messed up, but what it says in the beginning is, it was really when I saw GPT-3, the previous version of OpenAI's technology, that I started to get really excited about generative AI. I mean, people were working on it before then, but it wasn't very good. And I've been in AI a very long time, and I've always been excited about this technology because it helps us be more efficient, and I love making things more efficient. But finally, we were starting to see ways that this technology could make us more creative. But the rest of the world wasn't really paying that much attention yet to the technology. It was then OpenAI was released Codex a little bit later, and the developers started paying attention. And they did the same thing. Instead of just training on alt text, they trained on the code that they found on the internet. And all of a sudden, developers will realize, wow, this could make me so much more efficient. I don't have to write code from scratch anymore. Next up, all of a sudden, April through August, there were numerous text-to-image systems that came out: DALL-E 2, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. And for the most part, for most of us, it was just fun. We put in phrases, get back images. But it was really with the release of ChatGPT a year ago, happy birthday, that everybody started to realize there is something major happening. People who weren't paying attention to it before, people who never thought about AI, started exploring this technology. And it took 2 months to reach 100 million monthly users, which is pretty remarkable compared to everything we've seen before. You could talk to people, kids in the street, and they'd be like, hey, look, I'm using ChatGPT. And obviously this was groundbreaking. So one of the first things that I got really excited about as I started exploring this technology was thinking about, I mean, even with the issues, I'm sure everybody here has heard about hallucinations, it makes things up, but even with those issues, as a brainstorming tool, like, who cares if it hallucinates? That's totally fine. Sometimes that's a good thing. If I'm brainstorming and I'm in a room with humans and somebody throws out a crazy idea, like, sometimes that gets me to think about it actually a good idea. Nobody minds that in a brainstorming tool. So this is one simple example. I said we'd like to develop an app to help people save more money. Any suggestions? And it gave me back 7 suggestions. If I hate these 7, I can run it again, get a different 7. If there's one I really like, I could ask it to elaborate on it. And so as a brainstorming tool, immediately, many already found this to be very, very useful. The other thing I started thinking about was, okay, one of my slides aren't working, but another thing I started thinking about was the area of financial literacy. I immediately started using it as an education tool. And the reason I like it for learning is you could ask a human. If somebody here doesn't understand something I'm saying, maybe you'll come up to me afterwards, ask me to explain it. If you still don't understand what I'm saying, you may or may not ask a second time, probably not a third time. There's judgment when we talk to humans, and nobody likes that. But with AI, you can ask 10 times, you can ask 10 different ways. You could say, explain it to me as though I'm a college student, explain it to me as though I'm a 5th grader, and there's no judgment. So I started using it for financial literacy questions. I asked, okay, how do I explain a 401k to a teenager? And I thought it did a pretty good job. But then I went further on. I'm sorry that the slide doesn't work, so I can't show you the answer. But I asked, okay, now use a sports metaphor. And what was really exciting about the answer is immediately started using basketball, which I liked because it was a common sport that most people know. And it was great at doing the answer. It said, oh, consider the coach, compare it to the 401k plan administrator that gives you tips. Imagine if you started playing basketball really young, you'd probably be much better. Similarly, if you started investing early, you'd have a lot more. And it did this all on the fly. And we've been talking about, I mentioned I've been in AI a very long time. We've been talking about personalization for so long. This was the first time I felt like we had individual personalization. We could finally learn things in our own individualized way. I didn't have to ask about sports. I could have asked about anything. One thing I wanted to highlight is something that really excited me and excites me is seeing how people are thinking about combining technologies. So this large language model technology has many issues, but there are a lot of other technologies that handle those issues. So thinking about it in combinations of other technologies is really where I see the power. This is one example, an easy example to understand. We have Microsoft, Google saying, let's incorporate this technology into our search engines. So this fixes two problems. One is we cannot get real-time information right now from these language models. They're too expensive to update in real time. And with search engine technology, we could. The second thing it fixes is you can, if it makes something up, you have sources. So you can go and verify what it says. So this is great for a tool that you can't completely trust. And this example is just a very simple example. I said, can you explain generative AI to me as though I'm a fourth grader? And it did, and it gave me links. I can go into each of these and verify and make sure that I'm happy with the result that I got and make sure it didn't say anything incorrect. So I've been looking at different industries to see how are they using this technology, for the last, basically since it came out. One interesting industry to highlight is the education space. And what I find interesting about it is that they're taking the exact opposite approach as every other industry. There are numerous education tools that are incorporating generative AI technology into their tools. But what's interesting is they're actually trying to slow things down. Everybody else is saying, how do we be more efficient? Use these tools to speed things up. But they're realizing if you're trying to learn, it's actually not the best way if somebody gives you the answer, even if they explain exactly how they got it. That's not the best way to learn. You probably won't remember it. But so they're using tools like ChatGPT, but changing the prompt, saying, don't give the answer. See if they can come up with the first step of the problem, then help them work through the second step of the problem until they can finally get to the answer on their own, because that's how they're actually going to remember it. The other space that I've been looking at is healthcare. It's been very interesting to see from both the patient side and the doctor side how this technology is being incorporated right now. Patients immediately started using it for things like, I don't understand my blood results, so let me try to understand it before I meet with my doctor. I got this MRI back. I don't understand what this means. Most of us don't have a medical background. We don't understand this jargon. Let's put it into a technology that could explain it before we meet with the doctor so that we can come in with much better questions when we meet with the doctor. And I do wonder if we're going to start seeing similar things in financial services. We have a lot of jargon in financial services. Being able to, before you meet with an advisor, say, hey, let me just get some explanation of what these phrases are and what this stuff is. The other interesting thing that I didn't really expect as much, but people are using it also for second opinions. I mean, often a doctor will tell you a diagnosis, a treatment plan. You don't know if this is the right thing or not. You may not be very confident about it. Most of us don't have other doctors we could necessarily ask. But now there's a tool you can kind of verify and then come back to your doctor and say, oh, is it possible that would be a better treatment? And then at least get an answer so you can understand. And I think it might be similar in financial services. How many of us have financial professionals we can randomly go to and say, here's the advice I got. What do you think? Here's the suggestion I got. So it could be interesting to see if people start using it in that way. The third way that patients have been using this technology is for mental health. And many people can't find a psychologist, or even if they have one, they're meeting once a week. Things come up within that week. And so a lot of people are turning to it for additional support. But what was also fascinating is seeing how it's being incorporated in the medical professional side. So the number one reason that doctors burn out is actually because of documentation. They spend so much time note-taking, and nobody goes into this medical field to write documentation. But now we're seeing GPT-4 being incorporated into tools so that the documentation is written for the doctors, emails are replied to immediately, but all the doctor needs to do is edit it. Obviously, we can't trust this technology on its own yet, but editing takes so much less time, hopefully, than having to write something from scratch. Okay, so what I've been focusing on now, it's a year later. What about for the large enterprises? We definitely, from the individual side, I mentioned brainstorming. A lot of even startups have been able to kind of embrace this technology. Have large enterprises been able to embrace it? So there are really top 4 risks that companies realized were kind of standing in the way initially. When ChatGPT was released, people didn't realize it actually wasn't a product. It was research. And so everybody wanted to use it. It looked amazing. Everybody saw the promise of the technology. But they realized, wait, what do we do if it's inaccurate? Can we actually send something to customers with that we can't trust? Can we trust these tools with our data? What about the fact that they're trained on data that they weren't even allowed to use that's copyrighted? There's so many questions, and even the fact that there are potential regulations coming, and how do companies handle those potential regulations? From the regulation side, the main thing that I think companies need to do is really follow it, because there are going to be more and more regulations that come up, and we need to be prepared. But what's interesting is the other 3, over this year, and especially in the second half of it, we finally started seeing solutions to help companies embrace, these large enterprises embrace the technology. So from the inaccuracy side, many companies started exploring some RAG, retrieval augmented generation, basically using a search engine technology with their own company data to then modify the prompt. And that actually ended up, not only did it mean that it knew more about the company business, it actually ended up reducing these inaccuracies significantly. There are also now numerous startups that companies are exploring that'll say, hey, we're going to help you rewrite your prompt so that your prompt is less likely to lead to a hallucination. Or we're going to actually show you that maybe don't use this large language model, use this other large language model. In this specific case, it's less likely to lead to a hallucination. And so it is interesting to see that these solutions are coming. Similarly, for the cybersecurity side, by the end of the summer, we started seeing Microsoft and OpenAI say, hey, look, you can use this technology now for enterprises. We're going to make sure that your data is not used for retraining our models. We also started seeing open source technologies that were so much better than the ones we saw in the beginning of the year. And so that also was something that made sense for companies to start thinking about as that open source technology is getting better and better. And from the IP side, it's interesting. There's 2 things going on. One is companies are starting to say, don't worry, if you get sued, we'll take care of it. It's still to be determined how much and what that means, and what about your reputation. It's still ambiguous, but that is an interesting step to obviously try to get the enterprises on board. The other interesting thing we're starting to see, and I've seen this in the image space, is a number of companies saying we're only training on images we know we're allowed to use. So don't worry, this tool has no IP issues. I haven't really seen that as much in the tech space, but I do wonder if something like that might be coming. So how are financial services firms moving forward given all of this? And so I've been following the financial service space for a while, and really there's 2 things that are happening right now. The first is that most financial services companies are recognizing that it's really the internal human-in-the-loop projects that are the easier win for right now. And so most of them, the majority of them, they might be thinking about eventually how can this go to customers. But for right now, let's think about ways our employees could be more efficient with helping our customers. So helping with writing code, helping with finding information. We have so much information out there. There's so many ways, using it as a brainstorming tool. There's so many ways we can still use this technology and train employees to understand its limitations. The other thing that's still going on that'll be interesting to see how this ends up is really so many companies now are saying they're releasing things with the commercial LLMs, but at the same time, they're exploring open source LLMs. And there's really so many benefits to both and cons to both. And it'll be interesting to see where this goes. I do think we might end up with a hybrid solution eventually. Right now, it's very easy to get something up and running quickly with a commercial LLM. If you're using open source, it's going to take you much longer, which is why we haven't seen as many of them released yet. But they're more customizable. It's also much cheaper initially to work with a commercial LLM than to try to build your own, hire great data scientists, have enough of the resources you need. But long term, it might end up being cheaper to go the open source route. And so right now, there's a lot of parallel discoveries going on in most companies, but it'll be interesting to see where this lands and how people choose between each of these sides for different projects. So in the financial services space, really the best way to think about this technology is where do you have so much knowledge that you're trying to access, share, find, and that's really where I think this technology is going to shine over the next year. And if we think about it from like investment research side, if we can use good brainstorming tools to help us come up with different trading scenarios, to help us figure out potential risks of our trading scenarios, these are going to be really, really powerful ways to help accelerate our research. The other area that I've been thinking a lot about is the advisor-customer relationship. Imagine if customers, like we talked about the healthcare space, imagine if a customer has a much better tool to learn more before they meet with the advisor. And the advisor could also benefit from tools that they could use to find the information they need better to help the customer. And potentially even knowing these are the generative AI queries that the customer has been asking about before meeting with you. They could prepare much better before meeting with that customer, and the customer can ask much more intelligent questions, and we can have a much better relationship. The other area I've been thinking a lot about is, as somebody in a large corporation, is silos. For anybody in a large corporation, you know that it's so hard to share knowledge across a company and to collaborate across a company. And this technology, I really think, could be a game changer here. If I had a way to be able to say, hey, I want to learn about this part of the business, and somebody else had a way to learn more about my part of the business, just by asking questions, and we could all collaborate so much more efficiently. The last thing I wanted to highlight is something I don't usually think about as much, but like the front end side of things. You know, I think back to when Google was released, we all got so excited because it was one text box and it was simple. And if you look at financial tools today, financial services, web pages today, it's so hard to navigate and find what you're looking for. And I can imagine the interface of the future, just one text box, saying, okay, here's what I'm looking for. I want to compare this fund with this one, and you don't need to have to know where to go to find that. It just brings it up for you. And so the interface could really be very different going forward. You can connect with FCAT over here with this, and I also really wanted to have time for questions if anybody has any questions. Hopefully there's still a little bit of time. Okay, great.
Questions for Sarah? Go for it. If you wouldn't mind standing and projecting.
Where do you see the biggest obstacles to these new large language model technologies and using corporate?
So the biggest obstacles are the ones I listed there. It's really the inaccuracy. How in the world can we release something that we know is not always accurate? It's cybersecurity. How much can we trust companies with our data? And then there's the IP risk as well with the training data. You know, can we even use these tools if they were using training data they didn't have permission to use? You know, and really also the last one is, you know, what kind of regulations are we going to expect here? That's going to limit us. But so those are really the biggest obstacles I see. And hope, yeah.
Any other questions for Sarah? Yes, just give me 1 second.
Thanks, Sarah, for first of all, great presentation, a lot of very informative session. So one quick question that I have, like, as you listed that it seems like for companies to move with generative AI, it requires some investment, correct? And like for any companies, when they're thinking about such a large investment, there's a question always comes, what's the benefit cost? So in these things, because we haven't seen this kind of issues before. So how do you really quantify the benefit cost before companies decide that this is a great investment?
Yeah, I think that definitely there's going to be there are a lot of cost benefits. There's definitely some of the costs are easier to quantify in terms of, how much do we have to pay this company, or how much do we need to pay for GPU and data scientists. But there's also the other side, like what happens if we don't invest in this technology? Those are harder the costs to account for, because some of that is more, if this could make our customers more knowledgeable, how do we quantify that? So it's always an issue with especially technologies that make things more efficient. To really be able to easily put a number on it is challenging, but I think there are ways that companies could think about things that really, in some instances, it's okay, we could relatively easily figure out the cost of using it. And then there's so many other issues. What happens if we get sued? That's harder to put a number on. So I do think it is a challenging problem, but I think companies need to think about both sides. What happens if we don't offer this tool? What happens if we don't offer a tool for our employees and they're writing code from scratch? Like, how much more that you could measure, like their efficiency, how much more each employee could do if they had a tool. It's harder to measure. So I'll give an example. I was working on a report. I write a lot of internal reports for Fidelity, and I was working on one about the healthcare space. And I actually had an outline, so I gave it to a generative AI tool, and I said, give me any feedback on this outline. And it told me, at that point, I hadn't thought about including mental health at all. And it told me, you're missing out. There's so much going on in the mental health space, and you really should include that. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And that made sense. It was a good suggestion. I could have ignored it, but I included a paragraph on what was going on in the mental health space. And I think it made the report stronger, but it's hard to quantify that. If I hadn't included it, if I did, a lot of what I do is also getting people to think differently, getting people aware of what's coming so that they can then start preparing. It's so hard to quantify the benefits when you're using a tool as a brainstorming partner. So it is. My answer is it's very challenging. There are ways companies could do it to some degree, but it's really hard to do it fully.
Hi, I really like the example of the doctors using generative AI for documentation, and that kind of gives me hope for financial services with sensitive data. What obstacles do you see before financial services companies could start using generative AI to assist with maybe the worst parts of developers' days of technical documentation where highly sensitive data is involved in that?
Yeah, so I do think we're finally at a point where we're starting to be able to maybe move past this issue. In the beginning, when these systems were released, a lot of companies realized there's no way we could trust these companies with our data. But now they're starting to be more enterprise-friendly versions that obviously a company still needs to look into it, make sure they really could trust the company with their data. But I think we're getting to a point where hopefully some of these tools companies will be able to trust with their data. And especially if they're looking at open source, you're not really sending your data anywhere necessarily. So I think that we're going to be able to move past this finally. It's definitely not last year when ChatGPT was released. At that point, we couldn't really do anything like that. But now I think that that's not going to be a limitation going forward as much.
Hi, Sarah. So there are obvious risks when it comes to using generative AI for customer-facing applications, but at the same time, companies cannot really afford to miss this bus and not go this route. So, do you think there should be a community which would score these models and create goodness of fit metrics for the generative AI model so that they could detect hallucination, and maybe some kind of tool which would just score based off hallucination for each and every tool? And is that gonna help, do you think?
So there are tools like this. Stanford released a tool where they rank a number of the popular LLMs, large language models, on how transparent they are and open they are. There was another one, I'm blanking on the name, that also did something similar about focusing on safety of these tools. So there are, it's not specific to financial services, but there are tools out there, and I'm sure we're going to see more that do rank a lot of these large language models. I know that a lot of companies are also internally doing their own, like having people like compare each of them, saying how much did it hallucinate for our use case, and it's going to be different for each project. But there are definitely ones that are available externally, but a lot of companies are building their own internally as well. The challenge is that it seems like almost every week there's a new tool out there or a new update to a tool. So it's not a project that could go like stale or go static. You really have to constantly update, and that does make it challenging. That every version of a tool, it could be completely different in terms of hallucinations, better or worse. So you have to keep reevaluating.
I've been pleased that a lot of companies are looking into the intellectual property side of it. And my question relates to much in the same way in data science and machine learning models, neural networks or whatever, when initially came out. And then there was a force behind to explain how they work, and different sensitivity tools were developed to kind of explain at least drivers behind it. And do you think any of that's in the conversation yet? Because as you mentioned, regulatory, and if you get sued, you'll have to defend how you delivered that answer at some point in time, maybe even in such a lawsuit. So where is that going in the world, and trying to not necessarily exactly explain the black box in large language models, but will have to at some point develop tools to have a drill down of drivers? And is that even in the radar yet?
So that's a great question, and explainability is so important in financial services, and these models right now are not very explainable. So right now it's a big open challenge. It wasn't on my number 4 list, but it's definitely there in the list of challenges. And I think it's going to be figuring out in what cases can we use this. For example, if it's helping employees with code, maybe in those cases, if the employee is reviewing it, it's okay, and there's a human in the loop. But there might be certain cases where it's not okay to use it because we want more of an explainable model. I do wonder if at some point we'll see more tools designed to help with explainability of LLMs, but I doubt they'll be perfect, no matter. And hopefully they'll be there and be better. The question will still be, in financial services with all the regulations, are we able to use it? And I think it's going to be figuring out in which cases can we use it. There definitely will probably be places where we still cannot use it because they're not perfect. But that's definitely an open challenge right now.
Thank you so much. We're going to take one more.
Thank you. Sarah, thank you. This is great presentation. Just one question, especially for the small size of firms. So we don't have enough resources to develop the LLM or our own packages. So my question is that when we leverage the startup or the third party to leverage the generative AI for our business applications, as you mentioned, there may be a bunch of startups, the new solutions coming out every week, every day. Is there any effort to collect those information, those resources, and to help the small business to select to apply to their own business?
I haven't seen any great tools at saying, oh, look, there's a new tool that just came out, try this one, especially for small businesses. I haven't seen anything like that. There are so many AI newsletters out there that do highlight, oh, here's another one, a new one, here's a new version of this tool, which might be useful for small businesses. There might be some of these newsletters that are catered more to small businesses, but offhand, I'm not sure, which one would be the right one, but that's probably where I would start, is looking for an AI. There's AI newsletter that focuses on small businesses because there are just so many out there. There probably is one, but I don't know, sorry. Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
no problem.